The project gets so complicated, it's really hard to make much progress. And so we're trying to get things down to kind of the simpler parts of doing the bodywork here. And that helps a lot. And I've still got a little more welding to do, always welding to do. I got my truck out of here, so I had to make more room. So you've got all these little parts that need to be taken care of. So yeah, we're looking at the body here, pretty well done. Of course, there's always going to be little pits, and every time I come in here, rub my hand along that beautiful bodywork, I feel another ripple or another little ridge or something. But we'll start putting primer on there, will be the next step to find out where the blemishes are. But we've also got, well, a whole table full of stuff here. Parts, splash pan, front, back, dash, parts of the dash. I just found the glove box door. You don't want to forget any of those parts because, you know, you get the whole thing painted up and you're going, oh man, I forgot to paint the glove box door. That would be so sad. So then all of the garnish moldings and yeah, just a lot of little parts that have to be sanded and prepped and primed and then painted. And then I've got the two doors. This is the worst door, and I've had to put a skim on the whole thing. The goal is to keep the body filler under 1/8 of an inch thick. Well, the goal really would be to use no body filler, but yeah, I don't have the time and the patience for that on this car. Anyway, the bottom part of this door, of course, is all new steel. And so I body filled it all, and then looking down it, and it's got a slope in it. Yeah. So I got in there inside the door with some wedges and stuff, and then pried it basically from concave into more of a flat surface. I mean, I probably only moved it like less than 1/4 of an inch, probably 1/8 of an inch in the middle. But it made all the difference. It made the body filler so much thinner. And it's now got a nice flat surface to it. So then the same thing with these fenders. A lot of the bottoms of them have been replaced, well, both fenders, front fenders and back fenders, of course, most of them are all new steel. And yeah, they're just rough, you know, so beat up, these old cars, that, I mean, it came from Saskatchewan. So it was on a farm, tearing down gravel roads all of its life, bumping into stuff, you know, like there's just not a square, straight panel on it. There's dings all over the roof, and yeah, the fenders are really dinged up. Just a lot of, just the rock dings in the front of the hood and the fenders are quite amazing. I mean, they like got hit with some pretty big rocks. Now the trunk over here is already done because I did it while it was on the car. It was just easier to hold on to. So this car body already has epoxy primer on it after the fresh sandblasted steel, right? And the epoxy primer works by gluing itself, basically adhering itself to the surface of that steel, sealing it so that no rust can happen. And then on top of that, you put the body filler, which needs some teeth to hold on to, okay? It doesn't glue itself on, it kind of grips itself on, right? So you sand that primer down to like 80 grit or whatever, and then put your body filler on. And then you take that down to like 180 grit, and then put the high build primer on. And I've used the black spray paint, right? Where's my can of spray paint? Right here. Fast dry black spray paint, put a skim on everything, and then gone over it with the long sander to find any high or low spots in it. And yeah, it's very revealing, I'll tell you what, it really helps. It's really worth doing that, because even the little edges sometimes on the body filler, you know, where you put a new layer on and you've left an edge you don't notice, it'll show up with that. So much nicer to have it show up before you prime it. Okay, so I mean, man, this feels like a baby's bum. It's pretty nice. Yeah, but then you never know. You prime it and wet sand it, you know, wet it down a little bit, and you start looking at it and it's got, yeah, we'll see, okay? And today my next big job is this hood, because I am going to get it welded down the middle. I took that little rib thing off of there yesterday so that I can get the bodywork done on it. Interesting thing is, you know, you start messing with the hood and all of a sudden you find a spot that caves in, you know, the oil can effect, bong bong, because kids jumped on it, right? And then so you're looking closely, and it's got a lot of little ripples in it, like little bends and stuff where it's been bent. There's some little pokey things that are sticking out, which I got to pound down. But I think I'll weld it a little bit, and then I'll take my long sandpaper and see if I can identify where I can, hammer and dolly it out, and then whatever needs to be filled after that. Dab for every golf ball size of filler. Better to have too much. If you don't put enough in, it won't harden quickly enough. You'll be waiting for it. Now these 40s, 50s cars, well, way back, were actually leaded together in a sense that they would stamp the roof in one piece and then the bottom in, I don't know, probably a couple pieces and join it in the middle somewhere. So there's this joint that runs all the way on this car from the back of the eaves trough down to the trunk. And if you look at the trunk area there, you can see where the steels join. And then they kind of leave like a crevice, right? A little ditch. And they fill it with lead. And then the lead is filed off to make it smooth. It actually comes right through here, right through the window frame. And I think it's probably good enough for 1949 standards. This car was probably painted a dark green enamel, you know, so it didn't have to be that great. But boy, when I start spraying this cherry red paint on, and then a few coats of clear, any of those little ripples are going to show up terribly. So we will just smooth that right off. And the same thing at the front. The front is right at the top of the pillar on the windshield. And it's actually cracked, the lead on this side, so I've just dug it out with a chisel and I'll fill in some. But it just needs to touch up and get a little bit of smoothness going. Okay, but here's the deal now. Today, in order to spray some primer on this, I've been dry sanding everything, so everything's really dusty. I don't want to start spraying some, well, filler primer, basically, high build primer, just on the parts where I've done the body filling, and then maybe a few other parts where it's a bit rough. I'm going to go sparingly with it though, because I think I've done a good job on the filling and sanding, taking it all down to 180 grit. And to put primer on, yeah, I'm gonna have to do a bit of cleanup in here. This place is so dusty. It's got like, well, buckets of dust on the floor. But my big challenge today is because it's so stinking cold out and it's so dusty in here, I'm gonna just have to put a mask on and open the doors and blow out as much dust as I can out into the frozen back alley. Yeah, the neighbors are all tucked away in their living rooms with their feet up by the fireplace anyway, so it's not going to bother anybody. And then in the spring, the snow's going to melt, it's going to be covered with dust, but that'll all wash down to the river. The other thing is I don't even want to have my camera in here. It's going to be so dusty, so I'll go find another camera. It's a little more dust proof. Yeah, to get some B-roll. And then we will blow this out, maybe spray a little primer. It's going to freeze it in here though. It was minus 30 this morning going to church and coming home in my old 42 Chev, boy, I tell you what, you got to warm it up for 15 minutes before you can move it. And it just, and then the windows kind of all freeze up and stuff. I tell my wife, honey, don't breathe, okay? Because it's making fog on the windows. It turns into ice. And she's so sweet. She tries not to breathe. The high build primer, you can take it down to like 180 grit as well, and then spray it again with the epoxy primer. Now, that might not be the exact right process, but there's a reason for doing that. And that is that when you put the base coat on, because it's a metallic base coat, you can actually see through that base coat and see what's underneath it. So if you've got dark and white patches, you're gonna have dark and bright base coat. So when I put the cherry red paint on, I want it all black and it's going to be deep. In fact, you put the first coat of cherry red paint on, you'll actually be able to see right through it and you can see the black stuff right there. So you got to take like 3 coats or whatever to cover that up. So in this final wet sanding, 500 grit, you want to take out anything that would be like shiny spots because of orange peel in the primer or whatever like that, any roughness in the primer. You've got to get all of the shiny spots out. Any little pocks, right, or little tiny holes or whatever you want to fill them. I just fill those with this glazing and spot putty. You don't have to mix it, you don't have to wait for it. Well, you have to wait for it to dry, but it's not epoxy, it's not 2 parts. It's basically really, really thick primer paint that you can put on with a putty gun. And this is the part of the project that might be the most difficult. It's really where you need to use your patience and your tenacity and you knock them down, drag them out. I am going to do this thing. Because you sandblast the car, which is a terrible mess, and then quickly put on the epoxy primer to keep it from rusting. And leave it like that until you're ready to do the body filling. And of course, I did a lot of welding and other fabrication in between there. Then when you come to do the body filling, you sand it down to like 80 grit so that body filler can grip on there. You do the body filling, however many trips or passes it takes, and using that quick dry black paint and a long sanding block to find any dips or humps or whatever. You get through that whole process and then sand it down to 180 grit, and you spray the high build primer on, which is going to take all those scratches out, and it really does help a lot. And you probably might want to put 2 coats of that on. You get that on and you're going to sand that down to 180 grit. So now every place where you're going to respray some black epoxy primer, you've got it down to 180 grit, okay? So you put that on there, and then you start the 500 grit sanding, okay? That's going to be the wet sanding process that sometimes sands through. You're going to find stuff that you didn't know was there before because you're starting to work it down to a fine surface, and you've got to basically wet sand it and then dry it off, and then, you know, make sure it's dry, because that's when you see the shiny spots come up. My point is, you're going to be sanding and sanding and sanding and sanding. Use good sandpaper, okay? Don't chintz out on the sandpaper, because it just takes a lot less effort if you have decent sandpaper. Because in order for this red base coat to look good, it's going to have to be 500 grit the entire car. But then after that, we're going to put clear coat on. That's when the real sanding starts. Because you're going to be sanding that down to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, rubbing compound, polishing compound, whatever it is. It's intense. But we're looking forward to that. On the next episode, we're going to start spraying this car. That's going to be fun. And finally, we get to see some color.